The scorching sun beat down mercilessly on the barren landscape of Afghanistan as Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez adjusted his radio equipment one last time. His team of 5 elite soldiers had been tasked with a reconnaissance mission deep into Taliban territory, far from the safety of their forward operating base. The mission seemed routine enough: gather intelligence on enemy movement patterns and report back within 72 hours. Rodriguez glanced at his teammates scattered across the rocky outcrop. Each man focused on his assigned role. Corporal Jake Thompson scanned the horizon through his scope, his weathered face squinting against the harsh desert glare. Private First Class David Chen monitored communication frequencies while Specialist Tony Martinez checked their GPS coordinates for the 100th time that morning. The youngest member of their unit, Private Michael Foster, nervously fidgeted with his water bottle, still adjusting to the intensity of combat operations. What none of them knew was that their position had already been compromised. Taliban scouts had been tracking their movement since dawn, carefully coordinating an ambush that would leave the American soldiers stranded in one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth. The enemy had chosen their moment perfectly. Waiting until the patrol was at its most vulnerable point, miles from backup and low on supplies. The attack came without warning. Rocket-propelled grenades screamed through the air as automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple directions. Rodriguez shouted orders over the deafening chaos, but the situation quickly spiraled beyond control. Their radio equipment was destroyed in the first volley, cutting off all communication with headquarters. Martinez took shrapnel to his leg while Chen suffered a concussion from a nearby explosion. As the firefight intensified, the soldiers found themselves pinned down behind inadequate cover. Their ammunition supplies dwindled rapidly, while the enemy seemed to have unlimited resources. Thompson's rifle jammed at a critical moment, leaving him defenseless as bullets whizzed inches from his head. Foster, overwhelmed by the intensity of his first major engagement, struggled to maintain his composure while providing covering fire for his wounded teammates. The battle raged for what felt like hours, but lasted only minutes. When the dust finally settled, an eerie silence fell over the battlefield. The Taliban fighters had withdrawn, apparently satisfied with the damage they had inflicted. But for the American soldiers, their nightmare was just beginning. Their vehicle had been destroyed, their communication equipment was in ruins, and they were stranded in hostile territory with limited supplies and 2 wounded men who desperately needed medical attention. Rodriguez assessed their dire situation with growing concern. They had enough water for perhaps 2 days if they rationed carefully, and their food supplies were even more limited. The nearest friendly forces were at least 50 miles away across treacherous terrain that would be nearly impossible to traverse on foot, especially with injured team members. The desert heat was already becoming unbearable, and nightfall would bring bone-chilling cold that could prove equally deadly. As the reality of their predicament sank in, the soldiers began to understand that they were facing a survival situation unlike anything they had trained for.
The enemy controlled all the obvious routes back to safety, making movement during daylight hours extremely dangerous.
Yet staying in place meant slowly dying from dehydration and exposure, while their wounded teammates grew progressively weaker. Thompson worked frantically to repair their damaged radio equipment, his hands shaking from adrenaline and desperation. Every wire and circuit board had been shattered beyond recognition, leaving them completely cut off from the outside world. Meanwhile, Foster did his best to treat Martinez's leg wound and Chen's head injury using their limited medical supplies, knowing that without proper treatment, both men might not survive another day in the desert heat. The psychological weight of their situation began to take its toll as the afternoon wore on. These were seasoned soldiers who had faced danger before, but being completely isolated in enemy territory with no hope of rescue was testing their mental fortitude in ways they had never experienced. Rodriguez knew that maintaining morale would be crucial for their survival, but even he struggled to find reasons for optimism in their current circumstances. As evening approached, the temperature began to drop rapidly, adding another layer of complexity to their survival challenge. They huddled together for warmth while taking turns standing watch, knowing that Taliban fighters might return at any moment to finish what they had started. The desert night was filled with strange sounds and shifting shadows that kept them constantly on edge, never knowing whether the next noise might signal another attack. Rodriguez stared up at the star-filled sky and wondered if anyone would ever find them in this vast, empty wasteland. Their families back home had no idea that their routine mission had turned into a desperate fight for survival. The sergeant made a silent promise to himself and his men that he would find a way to get them home, no matter what it took. But as the cold desert wind howled around their makeshift shelter, that promise seemed increasingly impossible to keep. Dawn brought little relief to the stranded soldiers as the desert sun began its relentless assault once again. Rodriguez woke to find Martinez burning with fever from his infected leg wound, while Chen drifted in and out of consciousness from his head injury. The harsh reality of their situation had become even more apparent overnight. Without immediate medical attention, both wounded men would likely die within days. Thompson had spent most of the night attempting to signal for help using improvised methods. He tried creating smoke signals during the darkest hours, hoping passing aircraft might spot them, but the efforts proved futile. The broken pieces of their radio equipment lay scattered around him, like a technological graveyard. Each component a reminder of how completely cut off they were from the outside world. Foster, despite his inexperience, had emerged as an unexpected source of strength for the group. He carefully rationed their remaining water, giving slightly larger portions to the wounded men while ensuring everyone stayed hydrated enough to function. His medical training from basic infantry school was limited, but he did everything possible to keep Martinez and Chen stable, changing bandages and monitoring their vital signs with the dedication of a seasoned combat medic. The second day tested their resolve in ways none of them had imagined. The temperature soared well above 100 degrees, turning their rocky shelter into an oven. Every breath felt like inhaling fire, and their limited water supplies seemed to evaporate as quickly as they consumed them. Rodriguez made the difficult decision to attempt movement during the cooler hours of dawn, hoping to find better shelter, or perhaps locate a water source. Their progress was painfully slow. Martinez could barely walk even with assistance, leaning heavily on Thompson while fighting waves of pain from his festering wound. Chen struggled with dizziness and nausea, requiring frequent stops to rest and regain his bearings. The rocky terrain that had provided cover during the firefight now became an obstacle course that sapped their strength with every step. After hours of grueling travel, they discovered a small cave formation that offered better protection from the elements. The shelter was a blessing, but it also highlighted how desperate their situation had become. They were now even further from any possible rescue, having moved deeper into uncharted territory where few people ever ventured. The landscape around them was an endless expanse of rocks, sand, and scrubby vegetation that offered no hope of sustenance. Thompson took on the role of security, constantly scanning their surroundings for signs of enemy activity while the others rested. His military training had taught him to recognize potential threats, but the vast emptiness of the desert made every shadow and sound seem ominous. He knew that Taliban fighters were likely still searching for them, and their weakened condition would make them easy targets if discovered. As night fell on their second day, Rodriguez gathered his remaining strength to address his team. He spoke quietly but firmly about their options, acknowledging the severity of their situation while trying to maintain the leadership that had kept them alive this long. They could attempt to continue moving toward friendly territory, though the journey would likely kill the wounded men. Alternatively, they could remain in their current position and hope for a miracle rescue that seemed increasingly unlikely. The decision was made to stay put for another day, giving the wounded men time to recover while conserving their energy for what might be a final push toward safety. Foster continued his tireless care of Martinez and Chen, using torn pieces of clothing to create better bandages and doing everything possible to reduce their fevers. His optimism in the face of overwhelming odds provided a psychological anchor for the entire team. Thompson spent the night hours attempting to create more visible signals for any potential search aircraft. He arranged rocks in large patterns that might be spotted from above, though he knew the chances of aerial reconnaissance in this remote area were minimal. Every effort felt futile, yet he persisted with the determination that had made him an effective soldier throughout his military career. The third morning brought devastating news. Chen's condition had deteriorated significantly during the night, and he was barely responsive. Martinez's leg wound showed clear signs of severe infection, with red streaks extending up toward his torso. Both men desperately needed antibiotics and proper medical care that were simply unavailable in their current circumstances. Rodriguez faced the hardest decision of his military career. Continuing to move with 2 critically injured soldiers would likely result in all 5 men dying in the desert, but abandoning his wounded teammates went against everything he believed in as a leader and a soldier. The weight of command had never felt heavier. As he struggled to find a solution that could save at least some of his men, Foster surprised everyone by volunteering to stay behind with the wounded soldiers while the others attempted to reach help. His logic was sound. 3 men could move faster than 5, and the injured soldiers needed constant care that would slow down any rescue attempt. But Rodriguez refused to consider splitting up the team, knowing that separation in hostile territory would likely doom them all. As the day progressed, their water supplies reached critically low levels. Each man was limited to tiny sips that barely moistened their parched throats, and even those small rations would be exhausted within hours. The desert heat seemed more intense than ever, creating a shimmering mirage effect that played tricks on their already strained minds and made it difficult to distinguish reality from hallucination. Thompson noticed movement on a distant ridge and immediately raised his weapon, thinking they had been discovered by enemy forces. But as he focused his scope, he realized it was just another mirage created by the intense heat. The false alarm highlighted how their deteriorating condition was affecting their judgment and making them increasingly vulnerable to making fatal mistakes. By evening, all 5 soldiers understood that they were facing their final night together. Without water, they would not survive another day in the desert heat. Martinez had begun muttering incoherently from his fever, while Chen remained unconscious for longer periods. The healthy soldiers were also showing signs of severe dehydration, with cracked lips, sunken eyes, and an increasing inability to think clearly about their situation. As the 4th dawn broke over the desolate landscape, the soldiers had resigned themselves to their fate. Rodriguez could barely lift his head, and Thompson's lips were so cracked they bled when he tried to speak. Foster continued his vigil over the wounded men, but even his unwavering spirit was beginning to crack under the weight of their hopeless situation. The silence of the desert seemed to mock their desperate prayers for salvation. It was Foster who first heard the sound, a faint whimpering that seemed to come from somewhere beyond their rocky shelter. Initially dismissed as another hallucination brought on by severe dehydration, the noise persisted and gradually grew closer. Thompson managed to raise his rifle with trembling hands, assuming they were about to face their final confrontation with enemy forces, who had finally tracked them down. But what emerged from behind a cluster of weathered boulders was not a Taliban fighter. Instead, a medium-sized dog with matted brown and white fur cautiously approached their position. The animal moved with obvious wariness, its ribs visible through its thin coat, suggesting it had been surviving on its own in this harsh environment for quite some time. Despite its own desperate condition, the dog's eyes showed an intelligence and compassion that seemed almost human. Rodriguez tried to speak, but only managed a harsh whisper through his parched throat. The dog tilted its head at the sound, then slowly moved closer to where Martinez lay unconscious. Without any apparent fear, the animal began licking the wounded soldier's face, as if somehow understanding that this human was in critical condition and needed help more than the others. Foster watched in amazement, as the dog seemed to assess each soldier's condition. With an almost medical precision, it spent extra time with Chen, gently nuzzling his head where the injury was most severe, then moved to examine Thompson's and Rodriguez's obvious signs of dehydration. The animal's behavior suggested it had encountered suffering humans before, and knew instinctively how to provide comfort. What happened next defied all logic and expectation. After completing its examination of the soldiers, the dog suddenly turned and trotted away from their shelter. Thompson assumed their brief encounter with this desert wanderer was over, but within minutes the animal returned carrying something in its mouth. It was a small plastic water bottle, partially filled with precious liquid that could mean the difference between life and death. The soldiers stared in disbelief as the dog dropped the bottle near Rodriguez's outstretched hand. Where had this miraculous gift come from? How had a stray dog managed to find water in this barren wasteland where they had discovered nothing? Foster carefully unscrewed the cap and distributed tiny sips to each man, the warm liquid tasting better than any drink they had ever experienced. But the dog was not finished with its rescue mission. After allowing the soldiers a few minutes to absorb the life-giving water, it began barking and moving toward the entrance of their shelter. Its behavior was clearly purposeful, as if trying to communicate something urgent that the humans needed to understand. Rodriguez, feeling slightly stronger after the water, attempted to follow the animal's lead. The dog led them approximately 50 yards to a depression in the rocky ground that they had not noticed before. Hidden beneath a small overhang was a natural spring that had been completely invisible from their original position. The water flow was minimal, just a tiny trickle that had pooled in a small basin. But to the dying soldiers, it represented nothing less than a miracle delivered by their unexpected four-legged savior. Foster immediately began the process of carefully transporting water back to their wounded teammates, while Thompson worked to filter the precious liquid through pieces of their torn clothing. The dog watched their activities with obvious satisfaction, occasionally barking as if offering encouragement for their efforts. Its presence had transformed their hopeless situation into something that might actually be survivable. Over the next several hours, the soldiers gradually regained some of their strength. Martinez's fever began to subside slightly as they kept him hydrated, and Chen showed signs of improved consciousness. Rodriguez found himself able to think more clearly about their options, while Thompson resumed his security watch with renewed vigilance. The dog remained close by, as if appointed itself as their permanent guardian. Foster discovered that the dog responded to simple commands and seemed eager to help in any way possible. When he pointed toward their shelter, the animal immediately trotted in that direction, somehow understanding that it should check on the wounded soldiers. When Thompson gestured toward a distant ridge, the dog moved to investigate, returning with intelligence about the surrounding terrain that could prove valuable for their survival. As evening approached, the dog made another mysterious departure from their camp. This time it was gone for nearly an hour, causing the soldiers to worry that their guardian angel had abandoned them. But the animal returned carrying something even more valuable than water, a small cloth bundle that contained several pieces of dried meat and some kind of local vegetation that appeared to be edible. The origin of these supplies remained a complete mystery. There were no signs of human habitation anywhere in the surrounding area, and the soldiers had seen no evidence of other travelers or nomadic peoples. Yet somehow their canine rescuer had managed to locate food sources that had completely escaped their notice. Thompson theorized that the dog might be part of a larger network of animals that helped each other survive in this harsh environment. Rodriguez began to understand that this dog was not simply a stray animal looking for companionship. Its behavior was too purposeful, too intelligent, and too focused on their specific needs to be coincidental. The animal seemed to possess an almost supernatural understanding of what the soldiers required for survival, and an unwavering commitment to providing exactly what they needed when they needed it most. As they prepared for what they hoped would be a more comfortable night than the previous three, the soldiers found themselves wondering about their rescuer's background. Had this dog once belonged to military personnel and learned to recognize soldiers in distress? Was it a local animal that had developed a special relationship with American forces operating in the region? Or was their salvation simply the result of one remarkable animal's natural compassion and intelligence? Thompson took the first watch that night with the dog curled up nearby as if sharing guard duty. The animal's ears remained alert to every sound, and several times it raised its head to investigate noises that Thompson had not even detected. Having this additional security presence allowed the exhausted soldiers to rest more peacefully than they had since their ordeal began. The fifth day marked a turning point in their survival story. Martinez had regained enough strength to sit up and take solid food, while Chen's periods of consciousness grew longer and more coherent. The steady supply of water from the hidden spring, combined with the mysterious food deliveries from their canine companion, had stabilized their condition enough to begin thinking beyond mere survival toward actual escape. The dog, whom Foster had begun calling Rex despite having no knowledge of its real name, had established a routine that seemed almost military in its precision. Each morning, the animal would conduct what appeared to be a perimeter patrol, disappearing for 30 to 40 minutes before returning with a report of barks and body language that the soldiers were learning to interpret. Its intelligence was becoming more apparent with each passing hour. Rodriguez noticed that Rex seemed particularly attuned to the sounds of aircraft, raising its head and ears whenever planes passed overhead, even when the soldiers could not yet hear the engines. This early warning system proved invaluable when a Taliban patrol helicopter flew over their area on the 5th afternoon. Rex's alert behavior gave them enough advance notice to move deeper into their cave shelter and avoid detection. Thompson had been working on a theory about their rescuer's background. The dog's behavior suggested extensive training and familiarity with military operations. Its ability to locate resources, conduct reconnaissance, and understand tactical situations went far beyond normal animal instincts. He suspected Rex might be a former military working dog that had been separated from its unit and learned to survive independently. In the harsh Afghan landscape, Foster spent considerable time each day caring for Rex, sharing portions of their limited food and checking the animal for injuries or signs of illness. He discovered several old scars on the dog's body that appeared to be from shrapnel or gunshot wounds, supporting Thompson's theory about military service. Despite its own obvious hardships, Rex showed no signs of selfishness, always ensuring the soldiers' needs were met before tending to its own survival. The relationship between the soldiers and their guardian was evolving into something deeper than mere survival partnership. Rex had begun responding to their individual personalities and needs. It spent extra time with Martinez, whose leg wound required constant attention, and seemed to sense when Chen needed encouragement during his recovery from the head injury. The animal provided both practical assistance and emotional support that proved crucial for maintaining morale. On the 6th morning, Rex displayed behavior that suggested a new phase in their rescue mission. Instead of conducting its usual patrol, the dog began moving restlessly around their shelter, whining and barking in patterns the soldiers had not heard before. Its agitation was clearly purposeful, as if trying to communicate something urgent about their situation that required immediate attention. Foster was the first to understand what Rex was trying to tell them. The dog kept moving toward the entrance of their shelter and looking back expectantly, then trotting a few steps in a specific direction before returning to repeat the sequence. The message was clear: it was time to move. Rex had determined that remaining in their current location was no longer the best option for their survival and recovery. Rodriguez felt strong enough to make the decision to trust their canine guide completely. Rex had already saved their lives multiple times and demonstrated an understanding of their needs that surpassed their own knowledge of the local terrain. If the dog believed they needed to relocate, there must be a compelling reason that their human intelligence had not yet grasped. Preparing for movement presented new challenges. Chen and Martinez were much stronger than they had been days earlier, but still required assistance for extended travel. Thompson fashioned improvised crutches from pieces of equipment salvage, while Foster created a more efficient system for carrying their limited supplies and the precious water they had collected from the spring. Rex seemed to approve of their preparations, watching their activities with obvious satisfaction, and occasionally barking what sounded like encouragement. When they were finally ready to move, the dog immediately took point position, just as a trained military working dog would do when leading a patrol. Its confidence in knowing the correct route was absolute, never hesitating at decision points or showing uncertainty about direction. Their new journey revealed Rex's intimate knowledge of the local geography. The dog led them along paths that provided maximum cover from aerial observation, while avoiding the most difficult terrain that would challenge their wounded teammates. Rest stops were perfectly timed to prevent exhaustion, and the route consistently offered access to shade during the hottest parts of the day. After several hours of careful travel, Rex led them to what appeared to be the ruins of an abandoned village. The stone structures provided excellent shelter, and Foster discovered another water source, a well that still contained clean, cool water. But more importantly, Thompson found evidence that American forces had used this location as a temporary base sometime in the recent past, including cached supplies that had been left behind. The supply cache was a treasure trove of survival resources. Medical supplies allowed Foster to properly treat Martinez's infected wound and provide better care for Chen's head injury. Food rations would sustain them for several days, and most importantly, they found a functional emergency radio beacon that could signal for rescue if they could reach high enough ground to transmit effectively. Rex appeared completely familiar with the abandoned village, moving through the ruins as if it had lived there before. Thompson discovered why when he found a makeshift dog shelter in one of the buildings, complete with food and water bowls that showed signs of regular use. This had been Rex's home base, and the dog had brought them to its own safe haven when their original shelter became inadequate. The soldiers began to piece together Rex's story through evidence found around the village. Military gear scattered throughout the ruins suggested that American forces had operated from this location for an extended period. Rex had likely been assigned to this unit and remained at the location even after the soldiers had moved on to other assignments. The dog had been surviving alone, waiting for new soldiers who never came. Foster found a collar buried in the debris of what had once been a command post. The nameplate was partially corroded, but he could make out enough letters to confirm that their rescuer was indeed named Rex and had been assigned to the 82nd Airborne Division. The collar included commendation ribbons indicating that Rex had been decorated for valor in combat operations, explaining the animal's exceptional skills and dedication to helping soldiers in distress. As they settled into their new shelter for the night, the soldiers realized that Rex had not simply found them by accident. The dog had been actively searching for American personnel to help, probably for months or even years since being separated from its original unit. Their rescue had been the culmination of one extraordinary animal's unwavering loyalty and commitment to its mission of protecting soldiers, regardless of whether they were part of its original pack. Rodriguez made a decision that night that would change all their lives. Rex would not be left behind when they were eventually rescued. The dog had more than earned the right to return to American soil as a hero, and the sergeant was determined to ensure that Rex received the recognition and care it deserved for its incredible service to their survival mission. The discovery of the emergency radio beacon transformed their situation from hopeless survival to active rescue operation. Thompson, who had the most experience with communication equipment, spent the 7th morning carefully testing the device and planning their best strategy for establishing contact with friendly forces. Rex watched his activities with obvious interest, as if understanding that this small piece of technology might be their ticket back to safety. The beacon required line-of-sight transmission to be effective, which meant reaching the highest point in the surrounding area. Thompson identified a ridge approximately 2 miles from their village shelter that would provide optimal transmission conditions. However, the journey would be dangerous, requiring travel across open ground where they could be easily spotted by enemy forces or aerial reconnaissance. Rodriguez made the difficult decision to send only Thompson and Foster on the transmission mission, while he remained behind with the wounded soldiers and Rex. This division of their small force went against his instincts as a leader, but practical considerations made it the only viable option. Chen and Martinez were still too weak for the demanding climb, and someone needed to stay behind to defend their shelter if they were discovered. Foster protested the plan, arguing that his medical skills might be needed if Thompson was injured during the mission. But Rodriguez overruled his objections, knowing that Foster's youth and stamina made him the logical choice to accompany Thompson on what could become a fighting retreat if they encountered enemy forces. Rex seemed to sense the importance of the mission, staying close to the 2 selected soldiers as they prepared their equipment. The morning of the transmission attempt dawned clear and calm, providing ideal conditions for radio communication, but also maximum visibility for enemy observation. Thompson and Foster moved out before sunrise, with Rex insisting on accompanying them, despite Rodriguez's orders for the dog to remain behind. The animal's determination to protect the soldiers was absolute, and it became clear that Rex would not be deterred from its self-appointed guardian duties. Their approach to the transmission site required extreme caution. Taliban forces were known to monitor radio frequencies and could triangulate the source of transmissions within minutes. Thompson would have only a brief window to establish contact and relay their coordinates before they would need to abandon the position and seek cover from potential retaliation. Rex proved invaluable during their approach, using its superior senses to detect potential threats long before the humans were aware of them. On 2 occasions, the dog's alert behavior warned them of approaching vehicles that forced them to take cover and wait for the area to clear. Without Rex's early warning system, they almost certainly would have been discovered and captured. The final approach to the ridge required a steep climb over loose rock that challenged even their improved physical condition. Foster found himself relying heavily on Rex for navigation assistance, as the dog seemed to know exactly which path would provide the safest and most efficient route to their destination. The animal's knowledge of the local terrain continued to amaze the soldiers with its depth and precision. Thompson established his transmission position just as the sun reached its optimal angle for radio propagation. He began broadcasting on emergency frequencies, repeating their call sign and coordinates with professional calm, despite the enormous personal stakes involved. Rex positioned itself as a lookout, scanning the surrounding area for any signs of approaching danger while the vital communication attempt continued. The first response came within minutes, a faint acknowledgement from an American base station confirming that they had received the emergency signal. Thompson's hand shook with relief as he provided detailed information about their location, the number of personnel, and their medical needs. The base station confirmed that search and rescue operations would begin immediately, but warned that extraction might take several hours due to their remote location. Rex's behavior during the radio transmission was remarkable. The dog seemed to understand the critical importance of maintaining security during the communication, remaining perfectly still and alert throughout the entire process. When Thompson completed his transmission and began packing the equipment, Rex immediately started moving toward their return route, as if knowing that staying in the transmission area any longer would be dangerous. The journey back to their shelter was more challenging than the outbound trip. Taliban forces in the area had apparently detected their radio transmission and were beginning search operations to locate the source. Rex's superior hearing allowed them to avoid several enemy patrols that came dangerously close to discovering their position. The dog's tactical awareness seemed almost supernatural in its accuracy and timing. Foster found himself developing an even deeper appreciation for Rex's abilities during their return journey. The animal consistently chose routes that provided maximum concealment, while minimizing the physical demands on the human soldiers. Every decision Rex made seemed calculated to optimize their chances of reaching safety without detection by enemy forces. When they finally reached their village shelter, Rodriguez was waiting anxiously for news of their mission. Thompson's confirmation that rescue operations were underway brought tears of relief to the eyes of all 5 soldiers. Chen and Martinez, despite their weakened condition, managed smiles that reflected their understanding that their ordeal might finally be coming to an end. But Rex's behavior suggested that their situation was not yet resolved. The dog remained unusually alert and restless, conducting frequent patrols around their shelter and showing signs of anxiety that indicated potential danger still threatened their position. The soldiers had learned to trust Rex's instincts completely, so they maintained heightened security despite the promise of incoming rescue operations. Rodriguez used the waiting time to plan their extraction procedures. They would need to be ready to move quickly when the rescue helicopters arrived, as the aircraft would be vulnerable to enemy fire during pickup operations. Chen and Martinez would require assistance reaching the landing zone, and all equipment would need to be abandoned except for essential personal items and weapons. Foster spent the afternoon providing final medical care to the wounded soldiers, ensuring they would be stable enough to endure the helicopter flight back to medical facilities. Rex watched his activities with obvious concern, occasionally approaching the wounded men to provide comfort through physical contact. The bond between the dog and the soldiers had become unbreakable during their shared ordeal. Thompson maintained radio watch throughout the day, receiving periodic updates on the progress of rescue operations. Weather conditions were favorable, but enemy activity in the region was requiring careful coordination to ensure the helicopters could reach their location safely. Rex seemed to sense each radio transmission, moving closer to Thompson whenever he received updates about their rescue. As evening approached, they received word that extraction helicopters were approximately 1 hour out from their position. The soldiers began their final preparations, gathering personal equipment and helping the wounded men prepare for movement. Rex watched these activities with obvious understanding that major changes were imminent, though the dog showed no signs of anxiety about its own fate in the coming rescue operation. Rodriguez took a moment to speak privately with Rex, explaining in quiet tones that the dog would be coming with them back to safety. Whether Rex understood the specific words or simply sensed the sergeant's intentions, The animal responded with obvious satisfaction and what appeared to be gratitude. After days of protecting these soldiers, Rex would finally see its mission completed successfully, with all personnel safely returned to friendly forces. The distinctive sound of approaching helicopters echoed across the desert landscape as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. Thompson confirmed radio contact with the rescue flight leader, providing final updates on their exact location and the medical condition of the wounded soldiers. Rex's ears perked up at the aircraft noise, and the dog began moving restlessly around their shelter, as if sensing that the culmination of their survival ordeal was finally at hand. Rodriguez gathered his men for what he hoped would be their final briefing in the Afghan wilderness. Chen and Martinez were as ready as their injuries would allow, while Foster had prepared medical information for the flight medics who would take over their care during evacuation. Thompson maintained continuous radio contact with the incoming aircraft, coordinating landing, zone details and security procedures for what would be a dangerous pickup operation in hostile territory. The rescue formation consisted of 2 Black Hawk helicopters, one configured for medical evacuation and the other providing security with door gunners and additional troops. Rex watched the approaching aircraft with obvious fascination, showing none of the fear that most dogs would display when confronted with such loud and unfamiliar machines. The animal's military training and experience were evident in its calm acceptance of the helicopter operations. As the aircraft circled their position to assess the landing conditions, Rodriguez made his final preparations for departure. He gathered the evidence they had collected about Rex's military service, including the collar and commendation ribbons that would prove the dog's heroic background. The sergeant was determined that Rex would receive full recognition for the role it had played in saving their lives during the most desperate situation any of them had ever faced. The lead helicopter touched down in a cloud of dust and debris, while the second aircraft maintained overwatch position to provide security during the pickup operation. Flight medics immediately rushed to assist Chen and Martinez, while Dr. Gunners scanned the surrounding terrain for any signs of enemy activity. Rex stayed close to Rodriguez, clearly understanding that something momentous was happening but showing no fear or confusion about the chaotic scene. Thompson briefed the rescue team leader on their situation, while Foster helped transfer the wounded soldiers to the medical helicopter. The flight medics were impressed by the quality of field treatment the injured men had received, not knowing that most of the credit belonged to a young soldier whose determination had been supported by an extraordinary canine companion who had provided both resources and morale throughout their ordeal. When Rodriguez attempted to bring Rex aboard the rescue helicopter, he encountered unexpected resistance from the flight crew. Military regulations did not typically allow for the evacuation of animals unless they were officially assigned military working dogs with proper documentation. The rescue team had orders to extract the 5 soldiers, but no provisions had been made for bringing along their 4-legged savior, who had made the rescue possible in the first place. Foster immediately protested the decision to leave Rex behind, explaining to the flight crew how the dog had saved their lives repeatedly and deserved to be rescued along with the soldiers it had protected. Thompson and Rodriguez supported his arguments, providing detailed accounts of Rex's heroic actions and the evidence they had gathered about the animal's military service record with the 82nd Airborne Division. The flight crew faced a difficult decision. Their orders were specific about personnel to be evacuated, and taking an unauthorized animal could result in disciplinary action for the rescue team. However, the passionate arguments from the rescued soldiers and the obvious intelligence and training displayed by Rex made it clear that this was not an ordinary stray dog looking for a free ride to safety. Rex seemed to sense the debate about its fate and moved closer to the helicopter, as if volunteering to board the aircraft. The dog's calm confidence around military equipment and personnel strongly supported the soldiers' claims about its background and training. When the animal spontaneously performed several recognizable military commands without any prompting, the flight crew began to understand that they were dealing with a genuine military working dog rather than a random stray. The rescue team leader made a command decision that would change Rex's life forever. Recognizing the extraordinary circumstances and the clear evidence of the dog's military service, he authorized Rex's evacuation along with the soldiers. The animal would be transported back to the forward operating base where proper military veterinarians could examine its condition and begin the process of verifying its service record. Rodriguez felt overwhelming relief as he helped Rex board the helicopter. After everything the dog had done to save their lives, the thought of abandoning their guardian in the desert had been unbearable. Foster secured Rex in the aircraft while continuing to monitor the condition of Chen and Martinez, who were receiving professional medical care for the first time since their ordeal began. As the helicopters lifted off from the desert floor, Thompson looked down at the abandoned village where they had spent their final days as castaways. The location that had seemed like a tomb just hours earlier now appeared almost peaceful in the fading daylight. Rex pressed against the window beside him, also watching their former shelter disappear into the distance. As they flew toward safety and a new chapter in all their lives, the flight back to the forward operating base took 45 minutes through mountainous terrain that highlighted just how isolated their survival location had been. Rex remained calm throughout the journey, occasionally moving between the soldiers as if conducting a final welfare check on each man. The dog's behavior continued to demonstrate the professional military bearing that had made it such an effective guardian during their crisis. Chen and Martinez received immediate medical attention upon landing, with military doctors confirming that Foster's field treatment had probably saved both men's lives. The young soldier's medical skills, enhanced by Rex's mysterious ability to locate supplies and water, had kept the wounded soldiers stable long enough for professional help to arrive. Without that combination of human determination and canine intelligence, the rescue mission would likely have recovered only bodies. Rodriguez began the process of documenting Rex's heroic actions for official military recognition. The dog's story would need to be thoroughly investigated and verified, but the physical evidence and consistent testimony from all 5 soldiers provided a compelling case for Rex's exceptional service. The sergeant was determined that Rex would receive every honor and benefit available to military working dogs who had served with distinction. Foster volunteered to serve as Rex's temporary handler while the verification process continued. The bond between the young soldier and the dog had grown especially strong during their shared ordeal, and Rex clearly trusted Foster completely. The arrangement also ensured that Rex would receive proper care and attention, while military bureaucracy worked through the complex issues surrounding the dog's official status. Thompson spent his first evening back at base writing detailed reports about Rex's contributions to their survival. Every instance of the dog's assistance needed to be documented, from the initial discovery of water to the final guidance during their rescue mission. The scope of Rex's capabilities impressed even experienced military personnel who were familiar with working dog operations. The base commander authorized a full veterinary examination for Rex, revealing several old injuries consistent with combat operations, but no current health problems that would prevent the dog from continuing military service. The veterinarian estimated Rex's age at approximately 6 years, suggesting the animal had several more years of potential service ahead if it chose to remain in military life rather than retirement. As news of their rescue spread throughout the base, Rex became something of a celebrity among the military personnel. Soldiers who had worked with military dogs in the past were particularly impressed by the accounts of Rex's independent operation and successful rescue mission. The dog's ability to survive alone in hostile territory while maintaining its mission focus represented the highest ideals of military service. Rodriguez received word that Rex's original unit had been contacted and confirmed the dog's identity and service record. Rex had indeed been assigned to the 82nd Airborne Division and had been listed as missing in action following a helicopter crash 18 months earlier. The other members of Rex's original team had been rescued, but the dog had disappeared during the confusion and was presumed dead when extensive search operations failed to locate it. The revelation that Rex had been surviving alone in the Afghan wilderness for over a year while continuing to search for soldiers to help added another layer of heroism to an already extraordinary story. The dog had maintained its military discipline and mission focus, despite having no human support or guidance for months. Rex's dedication represented the finest traditions of military service and loyalty that transcended normal understanding of animal behavior. 6 months after their dramatic rescue from the Afghan desert, All 5 soldiers had returned to American soil as heroes, whose survival story captured the imagination of the entire nation. Chen and Martinez had made full recoveries from their injuries, while Thompson, Foster, and Rodriguez had been promoted and reassigned to new duties that recognized their exceptional leadership during the crisis. But the most celebrated member of their group was Rex, whose story had transformed from military legend to national inspiration. The Pentagon had fast-tracked Rex's official recognition, awarding the dog the Dickin Medal for exceptional bravery in military service. The ceremony took place at the White House, where Rex sat at attention beside Rodriguez, while the president described the dog's heroic actions to a gathering of military leaders, government officials, and media representatives from around the world. Rex's calm dignity during the formal proceedings impressed everyone present and demonstrated the remarkable character that had made the rescue possible. Foster had been granted permission to adopt Rex upon the dog's retirement from active military service. The bond between the young soldier and his canine savior had only grown stronger during the months of recovery and rehabilitation. Rex had adapted well to life at Foster's family home in rural Tennessee, though the dog still maintained the alert, professional demeanor that marked it as a military veteran who had seen combat operations. The story of their survival had been documented in books, television programs, and newspaper articles that brought their experience to audiences around the globe. Rodriguez found himself frequently called upon to speak at military academies and veteran organizations about leadership under extreme conditions. His standard response was always the same. Rex had been the real leader of their group, and the soldiers had simply been smart enough to follow the dog's guidance. Thompson had been assigned to a new communications unit where his experience with emergency radio procedures was being used to train other soldiers in survival communication techniques. He often told trainees that the most important lesson from his ordeal was the value of persistence and creativity when standard procedures failed. His repair of the emergency beacon had been crucial, but Rex's guidance to the transmission site had been equally vital to their rescue. Chen and Martinez had both returned to full active duty, though they carried visible reminders of their desert ordeal in the form of scars that would always mark them as survivors of extraordinary circumstances. Both men credited Foster's medical skills and Rex's provision of water and supplies with saving their lives during the darkest moments of their crisis. They remained close friends with all members of their survival group. Rex's story had inspired military working dog programs throughout the armed forces, leading to increased funding for canine training and better support for retired military dogs. The animal's independent operation for over a year in hostile territory had demonstrated capabilities that military planners had not previously considered possible. Rex had essentially conducted a solo rescue mission that saved 5 human lives through determination and intelligence that exceeded normal expectations. Foster often took Rex to visit wounded soldiers at military medical facilities, where the dog's presence provided comfort and inspiration to troops recovering from combat injuries. Rex seemed to understand the special needs of wounded warriors, showing the same gentle attention and compassion that had helped Foster care for Chen and Martinez during their desert ordeal. These visits had become an important part of Rex's retirement activities. The abandoned village where they had spent their final days. Before rescue had been investigated by military teams who confirmed Rex's use of the location as a base of operations. Evidence suggested that the dog had been systematically searching for American personnel in the region, maintaining survival caches and developing extensive knowledge of local terrain that had proved crucial during the rescue operation. Rex had essentially been conducting military operations. Without human supervision or support, Rodriguez had been promoted to Master Sergeant and assigned to a training role where he taught survival techniques to special operations personnel. His curriculum included extensive material about the psychological aspects of survival and the importance of maintaining hope during desperate circumstances. He always emphasized that Rex's arrival had provided not just practical assistance, but the spiritual lift that had kept all 5 soldiers fighting for their lives. Thompson's technical analysis of their survival had been incorporated into military survival manuals as a case study in resource management and creative problem-solving. The combination of human ingenuity and Rex's natural abilities had created synergies that multiplied their effectiveness far beyond what either could have achieved independently. Military researchers continued to study their experience for insights into human-animal cooperation. During crisis situations, Foster had enrolled in veterinary school with the goal of specializing in military working dog medicine, inspired by his experience with Rex and his desire to help other canine heroes receive the best possible care. Rex accompanied him to classes whenever possible, serving as a living example of the remarkable capabilities and needs of working dogs who had served in combat operations. The dog's presence enhanced Foster's education while providing therapy animal services to stressed students. Chen had written a book about their survival experience that became a bestseller and raised funds for military working dog charities. His account focused heavily on Rex's contributions and the lessons their ordeal had taught about courage, loyalty, and the bonds that could form between humans and animals under extreme circumstances. The book's success had enabled significant donations to organizations supporting retired military working dogs. Martinez had become an advocate for veteran mental health services, speaking openly about the psychological challenges of their survival experience and the healing process that had followed their rescue. He credited Rex's presence during their ordeal with providing emotional stability that had prevented psychological breakdown during the worst moments. His advocacy work had helped secure better mental health support for soldiers returning from combat deployments. The 5 soldiers maintained regular contact with each other, gathering annually on the anniversary of their rescue for a reunion that always included Rex as the guest of honor. These gatherings had become celebrations not just of their survival, but of the extraordinary bond they shared with the dog who had saved their lives. Rex's presence at these events served as a reminder of the miracle that had brought them all home safely. As Rex entered the later years of his life, surrounded by the love and care of Foster's family and the respect of a grateful nation, the dog's legacy continued to grow. Military working dog programs had been expanded and improved based on lessons learned from Rex's independent operation, and countless soldiers had been inspired by the story of one remarkable animal's unwavering dedication to protecting human life. Rex had not only saved 5 soldiers in the Afghan desert, the dog had reminded an entire nation of the heroism, loyalty, and sacrifice that defined the finest traditions of military service.